There are adaptive things that our body does to work through emotions that if you don't do that, they stay with you. So you mentioned yelling, you mentioned expressing anger, you mentioned crying. Those are all things that our body does to process emotion that if we don't do, the emotion doesn't get processed. And then our brains get confused about the past and the present because the past event hasn't actually been filed in the past.
Welcome back to Chakra Free Radio. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing how to effectively work with a therapist. The reason why we want to discuss this is that there's an obvious explosion in mental health issues out there. A lot of people struggling with very, very serious problems. And in a lot of cases, I think people who maybe want to work through problems end up hitting roadblocks and need some assistance in terms of moving forward in their life. So we are very, very honored to have as our guest today, Dr. Ethan Seidman. Ethan, thank you for joining.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. And so for some quick background on Ethan, founder and director of Kendall Psychological Associates based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, attended Wesleyan University and received his PhD from UMass Boston, has been teaching and serving as a clinician in the area for a long time now. How long has it been?
About 25 years.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. And has been associated as an instructor at the Harvard Medical School. And his specific areas of interest include, and this is a serious list, depression, anxiety, relationship issues, trauma, online addictions, and sex and sexuality issues. That's kind of the gamut of human problems right there.
Yeah, it's people.
Yeah.
People. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. When I asked Ethan to join us, his question, I think it was a good question, is what does therapy have to do with spirituality? And so I just want to say up front, when we look at spiritual practices, and especially in terms of trying to look within our own inner consciousness, a lot of times one of the biggest problems we run into is the various psychological stuff that we've got to clear through before we can really make progress. Within yoga, there's a huge emphasis on the psychological aspects of development. And traditionally, if you had a guru, that guru would have spent a lot of time breaking down some of the mental constructs that you've created around yourself. So the mental health is an important aspect of trying to move forward spiritually. And that's the reason why I asked Ethan to join us for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So Ethan, yes, what got you started as a therapist? Like, why did you want to do it in the first place?
It's actually my second career. I had a very brief career as a journalist first.
Did you really?
Yeah. With all therapists, what you'll usually find is there's some combination of childhood family role that leads people to either finding some parallel in being a therapist that activates skills that they sort of grew up having from their role in the family.
Right.
And then some natural intellectual interest and usually the desire to help people. So for me, my skill set is very limited. There's only a few things I could probably do well. And, psychotherapy was one of them. But I started out as a journalist and I liked asking people a lot of nosy questions and I liked meeting a wide range of people. And I liked, I was a great consumer of journalism. So I liked the world of journalism, but I quickly found that, one, the relationship you have as a reporter with the people that you're interviewing is often transactional and exploitative to some degree. You have to be reflexively interested in almost anything in the external world to be a good reporter. And, I think I was writing a piece on alternative sewage treatment systems or something. And, it was, I could see that it was interesting to many people and it had inherent value, but it wasn't super interesting to me. And
right.
I just didn't think I had the inherent curiosity about everything that you need to be a good journalist. And also it was, I got offered a job to go work at a newspaper in New Hampshire right before the presidential primaries were starting, which was like the kind of job you want to get if you're going to like move up. I was pretty young, and meant going to live in this small town in New Hampshire and make $17,000 a year, and you got one day off a year, and,
right.
and I was like, and if I saw in myself that I didn't want to take that job, then I knew that I didn't really want to be a journalist, because that was what you had to see that as a golden opportunity, as opposed to like, I don't really want to do that. So I think having a career track was really useful to me. Like I was feeling a little lost after college. And so picking a profession and it's saying, okay, well, you have to do this to get into grad school, and then you go to grad school and then you do it. It's like, oh, thank God, a track. Like, it was so helpful for me. Some people don't like, having a path laid out, but it was such a relief for me in that phase of my life. And I liked having a body of knowledge to learn, like a profession to learn, a craft to have. It's both an intellectual world to kind of take in and contribute to if you can, and then also a craft to learn about, how do you do the craft of psychotherapy? And so it had intellectual heft to me, and it had the capacity down the road to potentially make a living, which was appealing.
Right.
And it was, on the side of helping people and promoting healing. And sure, you're trying to make a living as you do it, but it didn't feel as exploitative or transactional as being a journalist perhaps did.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned, were you kind of the therapist in the family growing up, or?
No, I wasn't the family. I mean, the roles that, like some people are peacemakers. Some people are just sort of outside of the system observing. Some people feel the need to take care of their family members. Some people, there are lots of different family roles that can turn into being a therapist. For many people, being a therapist is a real departure from their family's values or their family's culture or their family, like it's a real like statement of that you're outside the family system you grew up in. My family was very cool with therapy, and
right.
all of them could have been therapists and been good ones, and they value psychotherapy, and so I wasn't rebelling by being a therapist.
Right.
I was doing something slightly different than my family, who are mostly academics. So
right. So I want to bring Ray in here.
I want to say something about Ray too. First, I don't know you at all, but I know that you are a person of unconditional love, because the first time I ever saw you, you were wearing a Yankees hat. And so that tells me right away that, love thine enemy and, love the hated is how you live.
Yeah. So. I grew up, as we talked about it, like now it's just like about like fashion and stuff. Well, not fashion, but like, I don't really care about that stigma. Like would I wear the Yankee hat to a Boston Red Sox game? No.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Ray, when we've talked about this a little bit, but you had experience working with a therapist when you were younger.
Twice. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just to be frank with the audience, I probably should have had a therapist. I chose to self-medicate instead. So, I think there's probably a lot of people out there who fall into that category. But Ray, I just want to hear from you, what your experience was like.
The first time I know where I was there for, but I don't really remember the conversations. The second time was when I was at, Nativity. We had a counselor, a therapist counselor. Around that time when I was at Nativity, my mom died. So that's why I was there.
Right.
Yeah, she helped channel the anger. You know what I mean? Like if I could have punched a lot more people than I probably should have. Well, I didn't take violence.
Right.
But if I didn't have that person, pushing it down and letting me release and talking about it and letting me cry, then I probably would have been a little bit more psycho. I don't know.
Everything you just said is, I know you just sort of said it off the top of your head, but it's very efficient and eloquent description of how psychotherapy works.
Yeah.
One of my favorite definitions of the roots of psychopathology, when people are going off track and developing a mental illness or just symptoms, it comes from Diana Fosha, who said that psychopathology is what happens when people are alone in the face of overwhelming experience. And that almost all psychopathology can either in total or in part derives from that aloneness in the face of overwhelming experience. So, you had an overwhelming experience and you had someone who was there to help you. We talk about processing all the time, but it's a very specific thing to process emotions. There are adaptive things that our body does to work through emotions that if you don't do that, they stay with you. So you mentioned yelling, you mentioned expressing anger, you mentioned crying. Those are all things that our body does to process emotion that if we don't do, the emotion doesn't get processed. And then our brains get confused about the past and the present because the past event hasn't actually been filed in the past.
Right.
So you're reliving it all the time. You're screaming at people who are not the correct address, like our anger is not being delivered to the right address, that kind of stuff. So, you just captured it really quickly. Like that's what a therapist does is helps you not be alone with it and helps you do the processing that you need to do that otherwise you'll just stay stuck in that place.
Yeah. But also prior, like not only we had our one-on-one sessions, but then we also had mom and dad, like whole like group. So
Nice.
like other kids from from 8th grade, 7th grade, 5th and 6th, whoever had a certain loved one, pass, we had a group for that. So I think that's where I started to develop like more empathy and sympathy, seeing other, men for others. That's Nativity's mantra, men for others. When I started seeing them cry and I don't know, like it just rewired my brain, seeing other people in their circumstances. Like
everybody's undoing your aloneness. Like I'm not alone, there are other people going through this and we all have to cry.
Yeah. And not only because I know I'm white, but I'm also Puerto Rican and there were other men of color, you know what I mean? So seeing everybody, we all had the same circumstance. We were there to, try to, express our grief and get over it. And we did it together. And should I go to therapy now? Yeah. I think I think I said this before. I think almost every adult should be in therapy. So I think now I kind of replaced my therapy with with like people like Gopal, like my best friend. Now I throw it at my wife. And I don't know. It could be like a coping mechanism for like I don't want them to dig even more deeper because I already dig deep myself. So I don't know.
It sounds like you had a beautiful experience. I'm really glad you had it. Yeah.
It was like I said, it could, like I could veer it off and did something crazy. Like if I didn't have that experience with Jane, she helped a lot. So
shout out to Jane.
Shout out.
So, I mean, Ethan, you've been practicing for a long time now. Is there anything that you've seen, say, in the last 5 or 10 years in terms of just, new problems, emerging problems that weren't there, say, 20 years ago?
Probably nothing I'm going to say is going to be anything that people wouldn't already think of. And I wouldn't say any of those problems were not there 20 years ago, but there's things that are definitely more intense now. Think, the stress of climate change and the stress of the Trump years, there's just a sense of existential defeat and dread and disillusionment. And, there's all sorts of different reactions to the stress of climate change and the stress of, the devolution of our country and into authoritarianism and the lowering of the standards of our public life. And, the falling apart of our institute. I mean, there's lots of reaction to that where, even if you're doing okay personally, you're not doing okay because you're carrying all the stress of everything that's happening. And there's a lot of grief about the world dying and about the country dying and stress of people living with all of that. So I think that was, climate change was happening 20 years ago. The world was not perfect 20 years ago, but I think there's a different level of disillusionment about the world and this country than there was 20 years ago.
Right.
20 years ago, there was an internet, I think.
Yeah.
But But, the impact of the integration of digital life into our very essence all the time, and what I think it changes people's sense of relationships and what's true and what's not true and what's reality and what's not reality. When life is lived online and then there's a real life and they don't always coincide or sync up. So people's expectations about what life should be like gets way off.
Yeah.
Especially in the workplace.
Right.
And I think things that we would have used to have called addiction are now just how we do things.
What do you mean?
How many hours a day do people spend on their phone?
Yeah.
If somebody said 20 years ago, I spent 6 hours looking at my screen, you might have thought, oh, that, it sounds like that might be addiction.
Right.
Nobody bats an eye at 6 hours,
right.
So I think that's changed. And COVID had a huge impact on a million different aspects of life, like the developmental impact on that generation that wasn't going to school at the time, the impact on our country, the impact on all the people that lost people, but also the impact on all of us who have the COVID virus and are living with the after effects of COVID virus. There's all sorts of impacts on mental health that I think the COVID virus itself biologically has on people.
Right.
So there's that. So I think there's probably a million other changes, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something we've talked about on prior episodes, but just in terms of the digital device usage and addiction, I mean, I think it's worth considering the day-to-day experience that we have now versus, 50, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And just the sheer quantity of impressions and kind of sensory input and overload that we're getting, and I'm just curious on that specific aspect. Like, do you feel like it's creating, like, I feel like there are a lot of people out there now who live in kind of self-created or internet created worlds that don't necessarily correspond to the way things actually operate. I just think it's hard because, if you're growing up 100 years ago and you're living on some farm, you don't have a lot of, ideas being put in your head about the kind of life that you're supposed to be living. Right. And now it's like, you see whether it's celebrities or, other figures, oftentimes they're people who aren't even all that well off, but they put on a good show for social media. And just curious on whether you think aspects of that are kind of creating additional problems for people.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a million different layers to this, and I don't actually see all of them in my practice or in my life, but one I do see, which is, probably familiar to everybody, but like, think about how hard it is now for, and maybe not your kids, because your kids are amazing, but when we were kids and we went on a trip, kids felt excited about seeing the mountains or seeing the ocean, or it was a wow, and the memories could be made from very simple things, campfire or, and you were sitting around the campfire all together, and the sense of the intensity of the experience of the world was different. And now when kids' brains are trained on so much intense stimulation all the time, it's much harder to give them an experience where they go, wow.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And where they have a sense of joy and exploration, and because their brains are fried. And you go to the ocean, yeah, that's nice. Oh, let me take a picture for Instagram. And now I'm going to sit around the campfire on my phone talking to my friends. I'm not saying my kids necessarily do that, but all the time. But I think it is much harder for people to have a sense of wonder and awe and a sense of presence in normal life when they're mostly on their phones, and what their brain is used to is phone stimulation.
Right.
I think that's a big daily change. Now, the communities of influence online and how that impacts people's identity, I think is huge. I don't know that much about it. There are other people who, like the young men who get just algorithmically pulled into the alt-right, superseding who their parents are, because you just start getting, if the algorithm figures out that you are a 15-year-old boy, especially a 15-year-old white boy who lives not necessarily in Cambridge, but you start getting bombarded with alt-right teasers and things that pull you into that sphere.
Right.
And then that becomes your sense of, oh, well, the normal thing is to, whatever the misogyny or the racism or whatever it is, that becomes like, oh, that's what it means to be a teen boy,
Right.
So I think that's happening all over the place in millions of different ways that I don't know about, but I know it's happening.
Right. Yeah. And, there's obviously a lot of people working with therapists. Would you have any advice for somebody who's maybe looking to work with a therapist? Like what have you seen in terms of the important aspects that for patients who've made progress and had success with you? Is there something that you think is an important aspect that the patient needs to bring to the experience?
Well, answer that in a couple of different ways. And the first thing that the patient needs to bring is radical honesty.
Right.
But that doesn't mean just necessarily saying everything you have to say and overriding your own self-protection. It means if there's a block to saying what you have to say, or I'm feeling something here that's constricting or inhibiting me, then talking about that. Right. So the radical honesty there is not just to dump everything that you don't feel comfortable sharing. It's to talk about not feeling comfortable.
Right.
Or if the therapist does something that bothers you, it's not to just, to talk about what bothered you. So the radical honesty isn't radical venting. It's just whatever is coming up, even if it's a problem, even if it's an inhibition, if it's a fear, if it's something that's getting in the way of this process, that is the process.
Right.
And talking about that. So that's one thing I would say. The other is, there's actually a lot of research on effective psychotherapy and what goes into making it work. And one of the biggest, there's whatever theory and technique the therapist is bringing to bear, and it's not unimportant. Therapy, like the skill with which they deliver the intervention that they are intending to deliver, and the skill with which they do the treatment modality that they think they are doing is really important. And you see that in outcome research, the degree to which the therapist is doing the treatment they say they are doing predicts positive outcome. And basically the skill of the therapist does predict positive outcome. But the other biggest thing is the fit. So you can have a therapist who's absolutely excellent in delivering the therapy that they say they want to deliver. But if for some reason the interpersonal fit with the patient isn't quite right, it's not going to be as effective. So, okay, in a perfect world, there's an endless number of available therapists who you can afford, who you can see, and so right. You wait until you have somebody who go, yeah, this is my guy or this is my woman. But okay, so that's not reality. Oftentimes you've waited 3 months to see somebody who's in network with you, who can see you at the time you need to be seen. So, fit maybe not, this is the fit because it works logistically. But
right.
But if you can, the thing you want to pay attention to is, how do I vibe with this person?
Right.
How do I feel comfortable? Do I feel seen? Do I feel respect for this person? Do I feel they have something here that makes me think I can do what I need to do with them? And it's not necessarily like, can I learn from them? Can I have that's a part of it, but it's, can I be my true self here with you?
Right.
Kind of like a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a relationship.
Yeah.
It's a weird one.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of unusual boundaries and restrictions that are necessary for it to exist, but it is just a relationship in the end.
Yeah. I remember the first therapy, I was like, it was around the time you met me, 8, 9. I remember it being really awkward at first. Because I'm like, why am I talking to somebody?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But it was I think it was the first 3 or 4 sessions, it was just horrible. I didn't want to talk. I could tell, when I go back to the memories now, I could tell I was disassociated. I didn't want to be there at all. And then eventually, she broke that barrier, and then we started talking. And I realized why I was there. But with Jane, it was just, she broke the barrier like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what she did that, I think it was in the time where I didn't have a mom. She felt like a mom figure, but she also was helping me do those problems. So I think that's what it was. But
right. So you're sort of raising the question, was it mostly about the difference between the first therapist and Jane, or was it mostly that you were ready in a different way the second time than the first time? Or was it, right? It's hard to know.
Yeah.
But there was a sense of a better fit one time than the other? And is that mostly about the therapist, or mostly about where you were in your life right then?
I think Jane was different in some way, because I don't think we're ever ready to sit with a therapist. I don't think anybody's really like wants to talk about their problems. You know what I mean? As from like what I can see, like nobody wants you to dig.
Right.
You know what I mean? Nobody, like for me, like I know my problems, and like I know if like if you open the book, you know, I could tell you, but like sometimes I don't want that. I don't want those pages to be open or whatever. But that's just me as a person. But
yeah. And Ethan, is there like a patient profile that has kind of been more challenging, or is there what's been like, what are the hardest aspects of the job for you?
To tell you the truth, I will talk in general about that, but I'm not going to talk about that in specific.
No, yeah.
Because I would never want somebody who I worked with to be listening to this and go, "Oh, I was like, So,
right.
And different. It's always really hard to predict, to some degree, what's going to be. But for me, I know, you're talking about whether or not people want to be there, and different degrees of readiness to do the work. Some people really like working in contexts where people are mandated to treatment by the court, or they are in prison, or they're in a hospital, and so the treatment is not optional for the patient. And some therapists thrive in that setting. I'm not one of those therapists, right? Like, I work in outpatient settings where people come to therapy because they want the therapeutic process. Now, some people come to the door because their spouse wants them to have the therapeutic process,
right.
Or their job told them they need to see, or their PCP told them they need therapy, but they're not really super on board with it, and they're doing it to please somebody else. And that can sometimes work out with me. I can sometimes melt whatever find the person's own motivation for doing the work and help them find it, and proceed with whatever their actual agenda is, instead of what the agenda they thought they were coming in to please somebody else with. But usually that setup doesn't go great. I guess you might divide sort of problems people have into what get called internalizing and externalizing. So there are internalizing problems where people are critical of themselves and overly inhibited and down on themselves, and it's a sort of depression, anxiety presentation. And there are externalizing problems where people are really dysregulated and they're causing havoc in the world, and they're and for me in outpatient psychotherapy, I do better with internalizing problems than externalizing problems.
Right.
Some people prefer externalizing problems. So in general, there are areas of expertise I simply don't have. Like working with people with brain injuries, working with people who the primary target of our the first order of business is, real substance addiction is not my specialty.
Right.
There are many things that are not my specialty,
right.
But
right. Yeah, and you're obviously dealing with a lot of difficult issues on a day-to-day basis. Do you feel like when the workday is done, you're able to kind of compartmentalize it and shut it off, or do you because I think it's a very difficult thing to have to,
I don't think about it in terms of compartmentalizing and shutting it off. I think about it in terms of metabolizing it and and having a clear sense of what's mine and what isn't mine.
Right.
And also know, like, I'm often thinking about the work at night, or my mood is impacted by what I've been exposed to that day, or, and that's just part of the job. I am really impacted by what happens in the office, and I think about it and I feel about it. And it's a weird job because you can't really talk about it with that many people.
Right.
So, part of the job of the therapist is to learn how to take care of themselves with all of that, and to build community with people they can talk, usually other therapists they can talk about it with.
Right.
But it's also can be hard and lonely in that way. The other thing is you come home from a day of talking to people all day. Like you said, you said earlier, you're not necessarily a talker.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty silent person.
Despite being a podcast host, But so if you imagine like you have a work day where you spend somewhere between 6 to 8 days in profound conversation, listening and talking with people.
Right.
And then you come home and you have all these experiences that day of like hearing people's terrible stories, beautiful moments of deep healing, feeling really stuck, feeling really excited. Like a lot has happened that day, but you're just exhausted from talking and listening. And then you come home and here's your family. And what do they want to do? They want to talk and they want you to listen, or they want you to talk. And they want, it's like, man, I just had 7 hours of intense talking and listening. And in order to show up for you, I need to, now have 2 more hours of talking and listening.
Right.
So that's one of the challenges of being a therapist. But
yeah.
Do you have like, when you get off of work, do you have anything you do to like
transition sort of?
Yeah, like, is there something that you do that like listening to music or anything that like helps you decompress it, and then you can walk into your family and listen to them and talk to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I can, I really like to walk to work so that I can have that walk back. And it is moving your body, listening to music, walking with music on the way home. I'll show up in a much better mood. Mm-hmm. There was a period when the kids were little, and you get home and there's like, now the kids are like, and I would stop once a week and have dinner at a restaurant before I got home. So I wasn't showing up hungry. And I had that, and I would sit at the bar and I'd have a nice meal and I'd have a glass of wine. And by the time I got home, I was in better shape. And once a week, that was kind of enough. That was great.
Right.
But like having some exercise at the end of the day is great. And some music is great. You named the 2 that I would have gone to.
Yeah, and I think maybe for people out there working with a therapist or considering it, I think it's important to remember the human aspect of the therapist too.
It's a holding both in mind, right? On the one hand, it is not the patient's job to take care of the therapist.
Right.
The therapist's job is to take care of themselves so they can be there for the patient. And so patients should not be expecting that to be their role or taking that on. On the other hand, the reason we have these things like the hour ends at 55 minutes and we don't do a lot of email therapy between, and we don't do a lot of, if you need to reach out to me, schedule an appointment. I'm not going to like talk on the phone with you for 45 minutes between, unless it's an emergency, of course. But the reason we have the frame and the structure and the you're paying me, right, is because the therapist can only do that for a concentrated amount of time in that role. It's not boundaryless. So
right.
So it's not the patient's job to take care of the therapist, but it is the patient's job to respect the frame of the therapy.
Right.
To not show up when it's not your appointment time.
Right.
And when the appointment time is over, to leave, and to not be bombarding the therapist all week with lots and lots of emails, there's a frame.
Right.
And so I think the way to respect the humanity of the therapist is to respect the frame of therapy.
Right. One thing we wanted to touch on is just the role of, and I know this is a specific aspect of your practice, but the role of mindfulness or meditation in helping the therapy process move along. And, we'd just love your perspectives on that. And just, my own personal experiences now, kind of, 3 or 4 years of serious meditation work. I feel like it's helped me work through a lot of issues that were always there latent. Mm-hmm. But I'm just curious on your perspective on how, you feel like it integrates into your practice.
Well, speaking generally first, before we talk about my own practice, there are many therapists for whom meditation and mindfulness is the central tool that they have to offer in the way that they work,
right.
So as you're alluding to your own practice, right? Meditation and mindfulness can be the therapeutic intervention. And a lot of work can happen that way. And there are many excellent therapists who get really good results for whom meditation is not a part of it at all. So, but I think the shared element between what we might call meditation and what we might call psychotherapy is developing reflective capacity.
Right.
Developing an observational capacity to not just be living what you're living, but to be curious about it and to be observing it and to be asking questions and just to learning the patterns of your mind and of your heart, and to not just be existing within them, but to be also observing them, and to come to learn that it's the observer, the watcher, that part of you is actually more you than the part that's being watched and observed.
Yeah.
And that can happen in psychotherapy with or without meditation. I mean, psychotherapy is a practice of, let's get curious about what's going on here.
Right.
Let's think about it. Let's watch it. Let's notice what's happening, and name it. And that's a meditational practice, even if it's two people talking in a room. It's a noticing and a naming. And you might not call that meditation, but it's sort of there's an element of similarity there.
Right.
So, some patients really, really get introduced to some mindfulness and really love it and take off. And it's like, it feels like, oh, that's the way I want to go. And they end up, like that's the process that calls to them for their own healing. And some patients, it's not what calls to them at all.
Right.
And so for me, like, some people say, look, what I offer as a therapist is meditation and mindfulness, and that's my technique and that's my interest. And, so the patients who come to me, that's what they're interested in.
Right.
I'm like, okay, we need to find what's going to help this person. And I have, a range of things that I might try and offer or suggest or, like practice together. And for some people, mindfulness and meditation is the royal road to where they need to go. And for some people, it's not at all, so you just have to be flexible.
Do you do meditation at home or at all?
I don't have a great practice, actually.
No?
Some people really are, many of the best therapists really are great meditators.
Yeah.
I am not a great meditator. I go in and out of different phases of it and different relationships to it and different intensities of trying.
Right.
There's a lot of therapists in town who are, like also Zen priests, or
right.
who are really or really committed Tibetan Buddhists or really committed in whatever their spiritual way is, and who have attained really profound experience that way. I'm not one of those guys, but I love them and I respect them.
I'm just curious. I feel like for me, part of the reason for wanting to do this episode is I think there's a lot of people out there who, for various reasons, really feel like they have this perception that they're not worthwhile people, or they're.
So here's what I say to people when they come in with, "I'm not worthwhile. I'm not good enough," which is probably the most common irrational belief that people have when they come to therapy. Right? I'm not good enough. I'm not worthwhile. And one thing I might do with them is say, okay, well, let's picture a baby being born, like a new baby, shining with the golden light that all babies are born with, right? Okay, were you one of those babies once? Okay, let's look at that baby. Okay, and was that baby worthless? Okay, well, no, that baby's not worthless. Okay, so let's watch 3 months, 6 months, still some worthwhile. Okay, 12 months. Okay, we're going to keep going. I want you to tell me exactly when that baby becomes worthless. When does that baby stop having the essential worthwhileness that all humans are born with? And sometimes people will say, oh, clearly it was 6 when the sexual abuse started.
Wow.
Or it was 14 when or some people say, oh, I don't know when it was. I can't point to it. Like, oh, and it starts, I guess maybe, then it starts some questioning. But people learn that belief somehow. They have an experience for which the explanation, I must be worthwhile, is the explanatory schema that they come up with.
Right.
And you want to try to find out, how did it happen that schema was what made sense of things?
Right.
Because that wasn't random.
Right.
So what problem was that solving? What cognitive problem was that? What emotional problem was that solving to arrive at, I must be worthwhile? I must not be worthwhile. So that's sort of how I would start thinking about it in psychotherapy.
That's a great answer. Yeah. I just find it remarkable how we're all subjected to a lot of abuse on a daily basis. It's a really remarkable thing. I feel like there's a lot of what we experience really reinforces the idea that we're all kind of garbage. Right. It's just it's a strange thing. I don't know. Maybe you guys disagree, but
I think if you start out with that belief, you can find confirmation of it.
Yeah. That's probably true. I mean, I'm a gloomy person by
like
disposition.
So. I mean, it also depends, where you sit in society and all that. Some people get it in their face all day. But certainly, if you start to have that belief, the world will confirm it for you all the time.
Right.
Because you don't pay attention to the things that disconfirm it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's true.
You only pay attention to the potential confirmation that I'm worthless, and you don't pay any attention to usually the much more information that comes at you that you are either neutral or great.
Right.
Like what Annie said, the inner voice.
Yeah.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So you listen to people all day. Who listens to you?
It's a good question. I mean, I've done lots of psychotherapy in my life myself. I've had, which I think all therapists tend to have done, lots of psychotherapy. And then I have, of course, my wife and my family who listens to me a lot. And then I have, I have a lot of friendships for whom the core activity is conversation. A lot of men have activity partners who, they play a sport with or they do something with, and there's, the depth of conversation is mostly about whatever the activity they're doing. I don't tend to have a lot of those friendships. Mostly my friendships are we're walking and talking, or we're drinking and talking, or we're eating and talking, but we're talking, and listening. So I would say friends and family, and over the years, lots of therapy.
Well, this has been a great episode. Thank you. So for our donation today, the organization you had in mind?
Mira, I think it's called, right?
Yeah. So I think the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Association.
Yeah.
So just curious on why that was an important.
I feel like we're watching state-sponsored brutality every day,
right?
State-sponsored terrorism every day. That is in front of our eyes, traumatizing our neighbors, and also attacking the fundamental conception of what America is, and attacking the rule of law, and just so many bad things happening in the attacks on immigrants and refugees.
Right.
And this organization is here to protect them legally. To me, the rule of law, law is a tool of oppression, but it's also a tool of protection.
Right.
And it's the only thing that mediates human relationships in some way other than interpersonal violence.
Right.
Contributing to civil society, contributing to the legal framework under which we're supposed to be operating, and trying to protect our neighbors who are being brutalized is why I wanted to.
Yeah, I think it's it's a funny thing when you look back in American history and these cycles of anti-immigrant kind of it seems to come and go in waves, and it was like 100 years ago, a lot of people who didn't want Irish or Italian immigrants coming here. Now there's no one would even blink twice, and so it's just funny how these perceptions change over time.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm like trying to make some link to the spiritual, but the idea that there's like.
Well, I think there is a very clear, if you want to take, from the Bible, Jesus is very explicit. What you do for the least of these, you do for me.
Right. The idea that people's nationality marks them as profoundly different from each other, and that one is better than another.
Right.
I enjoy being American. I am comfortable with a lot of American culture. I have no illusions that I'm not American when I go abroad, right? Like I understand myself as an American, but I have no contention that being American is better than being anything else, right? And I have no contention that the Americans who have been American for a minute longer than the people who've arrived recently are somehow more American or better than people who arrived recently. My grandparents arrived whenever, I guess depends who, but early 20th century.
Right.
That was a minute ago.
Right.
I'm not like more American than the people who got here 5 years ago. Or I don't even know what that means. So like, the whole thing is, and of course, I also think that, okay, people on the left and progressives have not understood the mentality that leads to the feeling of threat
Right.
from new arrivals and not having the border work better and more efficiently and having the system work more legally. I mean, I understand that there are a lot of people for whom life has been challenging and hard and who feel let down by how society and our economy is going and have been taught or in their life experience have somehow felt that immigration is part of why their lives are getting worse.
Right.
And so, okay, I want to listen to those people and understand their experience. Change is scary and people who look different are scary to some people and all that. So I understand the human experience with immigration. And, Freud had a great idea about the narcissism of minor differences. He called it. Just like the Red Sox and the Yankees, right, are both actually two major market corporations doing the same game.
Mhm.
And yet we have a lot invested. And it's fun to have an investment in your tribal identity as a Red Sox fan or a Yankees fan. That is fun, And do I actually think there's any real difference between the Red Sox and the Yankees? No. Do I actually, do I love New York? I love New York, actually. Do I think there's any inherent difference between people who live here and people who live in Mexico? No.
Right.
Do I think the country would be worse if lots of Mexicans came? No.
Right.
Might probably be better.
Right.
So anyway, that's.
I always find it funny, right? Those same people that want to take these types of groups of people out, but they like their culture and
Right.
they like their food. So it's
Yeah.
it doesn't really make sense.
There's
It's
a lot
you
of
like the culture and you like
a lot
the
of
food.
contradictions. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But you don't like the people because of what? But yeah. I had one more question.
Yeah, sure.
So I think I probably know that I've dealt with depression before. How would you assess or tell somebody to whether they're dealing with a healthy distraction or if it's complete avoidance? How would you try to tell them to?
So what's the difference between healthy distraction and avoidance?
Yeah, you know what I mean? In terms of depression or
Well, all right, I'll answer that in two parts. I'll answer the first part is just the difference between healthy distraction and.
Yeah.
So psychological health is marked by flexibility. So if you're using distraction, but to not feel whatever you need to feel, but you can then dip into the feeling and have the feeling. And then when it's a little too much, you use distraction to regulate it.
Yeah.
But then you come back and do the feeling. That's flexible, right? That's going back and forth between having the feelings that you need to have and distracting yourself. If you get stuck in any one of those polarities where all you're doing is feeling all the time and you can't get out of it, or all you're doing is distracting all the time and you can't get out of it, that's not healthy. So if you're stuck in the distraction, that's all you're doing, and you're never doing the feeling what you have to feel, then that's not healthy. So I would say the mark of psychological health is flexibility. Depression, I don't know what I'm going to try to talk about depression a little bit, but, there's so many different flavors of depression. We're getting at sort of the theory of, how much is biological, how much is cognitive, how much is relational, how much is, and there's if you put all those in a circle and they all have feedback arrows going to each one, right? They all influence each other. So you just want to pick okay, where are we going to start? What do you want to start with? Oh, you want to start with biological. Okay. Well, how about exercise and nutrition? How about getting some sunshine in your face in the morning? How about moving your body? That, the intervention of adding some exercise, for most people, it's cardio, but it could be weightlifting, but getting your body moving and getting morning sun on your face is going to have an immediate, well, not necessarily immediate, but it's going to have an impact on your mood, no matter what. That's a biological intervention. You want to go biology some more? How about nutrition?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how about, if you need it, medication? Those are all biological, and I don't make any big distinction between any of those. They're all working on the body, right? Acupuncture. Great. There's a million things you can do to treat depression just with the body. Okay. A lot of times depression is because people have feelings that they haven't allowed themselves to fully process, as we were talking about before. Those feelings might be grief. Those feelings might be rage. Those feelings might be, I don't allow myself to feel joy. It's too threatening to feel joy. So then we have to go, okay, well, what are the feelings that aren't allowed here? And let's have them together. So that's a feelings intervention, right? And that's a relational intervention. You don't have to be alone with those feelings. The sadness, the rage, the joy. Let's do them together here. A lot of times, a lot of psychotherapy in the United States is cognitive therapy. Lots of different reasons that have to do mostly with how capitalism intersects with our healthcare system. And cognitive therapy, not that cognitive therapy isn't effective, it can be, or it often is. But so let's look at thoughts. Let's look at your self-talk. Let's look at how you're constructing the world. Is it black and white and all or nothing all the time? Is it really rigid ways of thinking? How are you talking to yourself? What are the words you're using when you talk to yourself? Could we change? Like when something happens, what's your explanation for why it happened? Is it, I suck and I always will? That's the thought that you have? Oh, well, that's one, global. I completely suck. I always will suck. And it's all about me. Personal, global, and permanent.
Yeah.
Okay. What if we made it not personal, global, and permanent? What if we made it like, oh, I didn't do well on that one thing because for some non-global reason, like whatever, and it's not permanent, that will change. Or the person walking down the hall who didn't say hi to me, it's not that they hate me and that I suck. It's, maybe they're preoccupied with their life and maybe they'll be friendly next week, so you could address it just at the thinking level. So you sort of are looking at the whole circle and you decide where you want to start, which domain you want to start at, and you work that, and then they all intersect with each other. You work all the different domains and depression usually gets better.
I've dealt with it. I know people who deal with it.
I think a lot of people are dealing with it.
Yeah. I think mental health is just people talk about it, but then they don't want to talk about it.
One thing that hits me is funny too. I don't really know if I care about this or not, but we're talking about mental health, but what we really mean is mental illness. When we talk about, it's like people don't want to say mental illness. They want to say mental, it's much easier, much more comfortable to talk about, well, somebody's struggling with mental health. They're not struggling with mental health. They're struggling with mental illness,
Right.
I don't know if that matters or not, but I always think it's funny.
But illness means that it can get better though.
Of course. Some depression is like the flu. Give it a couple of weeks and it will resolve on its own. Some is like a chronic disease that you have to, that your body tends to, that your system tends to, and you have to kind of take care of the whole system in order to give yourself the resilience,
Yeah.
If you have a plant and it's wilting, it probably needs soil, sun, and water, or less soil. And so, there's something in it. So if you think of yourself, your system is wilting and you're not thriving, what do you need for sun? What do you need for soil? What do you need for water? What, oxygen, what is it that your system needs in order to thrive? And usually a therapist can help you figure that out.
All right. Well, we got our minute of silence,
okay.
Which is, minute of unconditional love to all beings. You're getting zoned out now, man.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. It's been helping me a lot more.
So yeah, Ray, you got our
A
quote.
quote. It's very simple. It's literally 4 words. Eventually, all waves settle.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, feelings are a wave, right? You
Mhm.
can't have them forever. They will come to the shore.
Mhm. And watch. I mean, I love bodies of water.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's where we had this discussion before, where I feel like that's my stillness where I go.
Yeah.
And you see the waves coming. Sometimes they're like this.
Yeah.
Then eventually they just.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're becoming an expert in yogic philosophy, man. That's
Nah.
that's essentially the entire premise of yoga is still the mind's waves and fluctuations. So,
I wish I could fully immerse myself into it, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Mm.
The phone.
yeah,
It's hard
Right.
to sometimes.
Right.
Do you have a quote or anything that you've lived by or anything?
There's one, without, I'm not going to get it quite right.
Mhm.
It's a Diana Fush quote about acknowledging the reality of the concrete. We pay attention to the blade of grass poking up through the crack.
right.
Yeah.
Mm.
This has been a great episode, and hopefully someone out there, if you're struggling with these issues, hopefully we've given you something useful to work with. And just remember, if you feel like you're not worthwhile, that's not the case. There may be a lot of influences in your life that maybe make you feel that way, but it may not be. In fact, it is not the reality. So, hope things get better for you. Ethan, well, thank you.
Thank you. I love what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So until next time, this is Chakra Free Radio signing off.